Drug Costs Now legislation. Over the break, the members had consulted with their constituents, heard from them about the importance of this issue, not only for the good health of the American people, but also the financial health. I have said about the cost of prescription drugs, this is an issue that outside there in the campaign trail and the rest, I've seen grown men cry about how they cannot meet the needs of their families when it comes to the cost of prescription drugs and what that means in their lives. So nothing is more persuasive to talk about the need for this and the difference that it will make than the individual stories that people will tell. And that's why I'm so glad to join our distinguished chairman in welcoming Pam Alvey and Doug Lehman to tell their stories. Before they do, though, I do want to commend our three chairmen, Chairman Pallone of Energy and Commerce, Chairman Richie Neal of the Ways and Means Committee, and Chairman Bobby Scott of the Education Work Labor Committee, three committees of jurisdiction on this legislation. It is the out-of-control drug prices on an issue that touches every American family. Drug companies are charging Americans 3, 4, 5, even in some cases 10 times more than they charge for the same drugs overseas, even though Big Pharma admits that even at the overseas prices, they make a profit. The crushing burden of huge drug prices is weighing on seniors, on families, on employers, and taxpayers across the nation. The American people need bold action, and that's what we are delivering today. Just as I said, the statistics are interesting. The personal stories are eloquent and compelling. But just to note that we did get the Congressional Budget Office report since the last time we came together to talk about this. And the CBO found that under H.R. 3, when more seniors can afford to fill their prescriptions they need to stay healthy, we will be saving $345 billion on the Medicare Part D program alone. For families, America's households, $160 billion in savings, and for businesses, some businesses, $50 billion. When we negotiate fair drug prices, we reduce insurance premiums, lift the burden out of controlled prices from patients, taxpayers, and employers. This is about making sure that the investments we make at the National Institutes of Health, that basic biomedical research, is the basis for much of the research that produces these wonderful drugs, and therefore we want all Americans to have access to them in an affordable way. And we want to do so in a way that is fair, that supports innovation, but that also makes that innovation, that biblical power to cure, available to so many Americans. So it is pretty exciting that we'll have an opportunity to improve health care, improve financial health for families, save lives, and do so in a way that hopefully will be very bipartisan. I remind that this was Article 1 of our For the People agenda. In the last election we ran and we said, for the people, we will lower the cost of health care by lowering the cost of prescription drugs. H.R. 3 does just that. And now I want to welcome to the podium the distinguished chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, who will be marking up this, well, he'll tell you about that, but I thank Chairman Frank Pallone for his leadership. Mr. Pallone.
Thank you. And I want to thank our speaker, and if I could just comment on what she just said about, what we heard during the 2-week recess that we just had. As the speaker said, this was part of the For the People agenda. And what I heard in the last 2 weeks when I was home was, first of all, that this was really something that people felt would give them relief, as you said. In other words, this is real. This isn't just pie in the sky. This is something that hits them immediately to know that we're really going to do something, or trying to do something that will actually make it easier for them to access prescription drugs, to get the drugs that they need, to save money that they, could rightfully be using for, their utilities or their rent or whatever else. And that's why that's one of the reasons that it hits home so much with the American people. And then the second thing that the speaker said, which is so true, people are outraged. When I was home, people were just outraged by the fact that they pay so much more than people pay in other countries, 4 or 5 times as much, depending upon the drug. They're just absolutely outraged by that, and they think it's totally unacceptable. So, as the speaker mentioned, our 3 committees are going to begin the process of marking up the bill tomorrow. In Energy and Commerce, I just wanted to mention a couple things changes that we have in the bill. We introduced, or we released to the press, a substitute this morning that has some of these changes, and I'll be brief, Madam Speaker. But first, we've included a phased-in increase of the minimum number of drugs that the HHS Secretary must negotiate on. As you know, we have 250 drugs that will be considered, at least 25 per year. But what we're doing is we're going to say that that the number would be increased to at least 30 drugs beginning in year 5 and then 35 drugs beginning in year 10. But I want to stress that this is a floor. The Secretary can, do a lot more and hopefully will. But this is a floor, and we are increasing the floor. Second, a drug that has been negotiated will remain within the same pricing structure until there are 2 or more generic competitors. So as you know, when we talk about these 250, we're talking about drugs for which there is no generic competition. The name brand drugs, if you will, where there's no competition. So once that's negotiated, it remains the same pricing structure until there are 2 or more generic competitors. And third, we're including a new emergency negotiation provision for newly launched drugs that is triggered if the price of the drugs meets certain requirements. I'm not going to get into those. But the bottom line is there was some concern that for newly launched drugs, because there is an international price, that we needed to do something special, and that's what we're doing. And then fourth, we've added a new title on drug transparency that's based on Representative Schakowsky's Fair Drug Pricing Act. And, I think transparency is important. People need to know why drug prices are increasing, and I think if we have transparency, that's going to go far towards addressing the pricing issue. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention before I introduce Pam Alvey is the speaker mentioned the CBO score. We did get a preliminary score last Friday. As the speaker mentioned, it saves $345 billion between 2023 and 29. That's a huge savings, but again, that's only for Part D. We still expect additional savings, probably a lot more, when we get a final score that's not just limited to Part D. But also the CBO estimated in this preliminary analysis that on the first group of drugs negotiated during the first year, prices would fall by 55%. So this is huge to show that we'd actually see that kind of a reduction in prices, and it also expects healthcare premiums and cost sharing will go down for Americans as a result of lower drug costs, because so much now of your premium is based on drugs, and that continues to be the case. So these are real savings, and I can't stress enough, as you have, Madam Speaker, what this means to the average American. Now I wanted to introduce Pam Alvey. She's from Indiana. She's a type 2 diabetic and is currently on 15 different medications. And Pam, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's an honor to be here with all of you. I didn't expect all of you. But you've braved the rain, and I bring you greetings from 130,000 plus members of the Alliance for Retired Citizens in Indiana in the 6 chapters: Gary, Evansville, South Bend, Indianapolis, and Fort Wayne. And Ron Long said to tell you, hey, our state president. I have been a type 2 diabetic since early 1970, wow. And I did very well for many years. And then all of a sudden, on a trip to Baton Rouge, my blood sugar went crazy. I ended up with an endocrinologist, and he said, you need to be on insulin, and you need to start today. I just happen to have a study underway, and we'll pay for all your supplies. Well, that was not good news, because I said I'm going to gain weight. He said, oh, no, you won't, and I gained 60 pounds in 4 years. But I'm down to 2 meals a day, and I'm up to 20 prescriptions now instead of only 15. I'm set for a an operation to put in a graft so that I can have dialysis, which is better than dying. And I'm not looking forward to it, but I'm also not dreading it because my income is $2,224 a month. I spent 45 years in the not-for-profit world where there was no pension. I had to retire unexpectedly, subsequently had heart surgery, breast cancer surgery, and I was just feeling glad to be alive, but then I was getting free insulin. That came to a screeching halt. And I discovered that not only was my Social Security retirement 2 to 3 times what the average retiree's income is, but my insulin costs with other meds was almost equal to my Social Security, and when you net my Part D premiums and my supplemental premiums, it was. Fortunately, I'd had the wisdom to get married to a man who's willing to support me after 32 years of single bliss. I can fix it, but it would never work again. There we go. So if I'm better off than 90% of the retirees that don't have external income other than Social Security, what kind of shape are they in? So I talked to my cardiologist, I talked to my endocrinologist, I talked to my nephrologist, and they all told me the same thing. They don't go a day without seeing a patient who cannot afford their medicines. I shopped around. I mean, I have done analytical work for years. I went to every pharmacy within reason. I found the least expensive one, and I still could not live if I had not married the most patient and affluent man in the world. He's not affluent, but he's broke now, actually, but it's my fault. In fact, I could not be here today if he hadn't loaned me the money to get one of my insulins yesterday so I could make this trip. So, you know, I know 2 little old ladies, I'm a big old lady, but 2 little old ladies who have nobody but me. I can't help them financially, but somebody has to. Now, you know what comes besides the Colts and the Pacers and the Fever in Indianapolis. It's the home of Eli Lilly and Company. And you're fortunate enough to have Mr. Azar, Secretary Azar, at Health and Human Services. They've come out with a generic of one of the insulins that I take, and it finally hit the market yesterday. I was so excited until I learned that I have to have a new prescription because it's not AB certified yet. But anyway, when there are choices, things are always less expensive. But there are so many drugs that, number one, my supplemental insurance will not cover, some that they dropped in the middle of the contract period, and so now I'm paying full bore, and there are others, thank God, that are $3.45, and I can do those all day. But the opportunity for heroes in this is almost overwhelming. Nancy, you and your chair people are heroes, and I am so grateful for all of you. You can't imagine, because you will save lives. Yesterday, my nephrologist said she had one patient who could not afford his anti-rejection drugs, and rather than suffer a low and deadly decline, he committed suicide. I would kill somebody else rather than myself, but that's just me. Anyway, we can do the job. It needs to be done, and there are room for heroes. I hope that we do the job that needs to be done, and this is a great start, and it is exciting, and obviously you wouldn't be here if it weren't. So I thank you very much for your attention, your time, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Chairman Neal.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Yeah. I did the arithmetic in my head while you were speaking, and living on $24,000 a year isn't a lot of money.
No,
Yeah.
not when you spend it all on drugs.
Right.
And
So,
not good ones either. I don't know anything.
so that, I think, is substantial evidence about why we are here today and why we're doing what we're doing. Now, this conversation's gone on for a long period of time. I think the stars have aligned, and that's why we've worked so hard on the Democratic side to put together the Lower Drug Costs Act and why we're committed to passing it. So the Ways and Means schedule is a hearing tomorrow, a markup next week, and then we will mold the plans together with the other respective committees that are responsible. But I think, as Pam noted, it's the crushing burden of prescription prices. And we also would say that not only is that bad enough, but also another important consideration, and that's the following. We have attempted time and again to encourage the industry, based upon the investment we made in the National Institutes of Health, to reflect those costs as they're passed on to the consumer. And it fell on deaf ears. So the Ways and Means Committee recently put out a report that found that drug companies on average charge 4 times as much, or even up to 67 times as much in some instances, for prescriptions in the United States compared to what they charge for similar drugs in other nations. It's not fair, and that's why we're addressing this with this legislation. As you know, the Secretary of HHS, as Pam noted, is in a position to lower drug prices through negotiation that is overwhelmingly supported by the American people. But our bill goes even further. Our legislation caps Medicare beneficiaries' out-of-pocket spending on prescription drugs at $2,000. That bears repeating, at $2,000. So thanks to this cap and negotiated prices, we think that more people will be able to afford their prescription costs than have been able to in the past. With more Americans taking these prescriptions as they're prescribed, families will be healthier and premiums will be stabilized and in many cases go down. So I want to thank Speaker Pelosi and the committee chairs for their leadership on this issue. We said we were going to do this. And today we're offering up the architecture for precisely that. So let me turn the microphone over to Doug Lehman, who is from Iowa, who's going to tell us about his own personal experience. Doug.
Thank you. My name is Doug Lehman. I'm from Sioux City, Iowa. And at 15, I was in a hunting accident and lost my first kidney. 40 years, I lived the dream. And then high blood pressure, diabetes set in, and I was on dialysis for a long period of time. I was the fortunate one to get a transplant, but after the transplant, I eliminated some of the shots, but I'm still on 30 pills a day. These pills have increased tremendously since I've been taking them. In fact, they just recently went up $500 a month, $6,000 a year. I've recently had to sell my home to move into my office. If I was unable to work and do the things I do, I wouldn't be able to afford these prescriptions, and I might as well just plan a funeral, okay? And there's lots of people that are in my shoes, and that's the sad part of it. Some of them aren't able to work. And the prescription costs just keep going up and up and up. They're never going to be able to afford these costs. And on behalf of millions of people like me, I'm here today to ask Congress to take action now to lower the drug prices. Too many people are deciding between groceries, and I've seen it, and filling their prescriptions. And you go without prescriptions and the different side effects, it affects you tremendously, okay, getting back on them. H.R. 3 would help all of us struggling to affect our medications. I'm getting real nervous here, but it's a passionate subject, okay? There's no reason why Americans should continue to pay the highest drug prices in the world. I'm urging the House to pass H.R. 3 now. We can't wait any longer. Please.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Chairman Scott. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's important to hear the real life stories. And I want to thank our guests for those stories. I want to thank our committee chairs for their leadership, and of course, the Speaker of the House for her leadership. The Lower Drug Costs Now Act is an important step towards addressing skyrocketing prescriptive drug costs, not only for taxpayers and seniors, but also for working families and American businesses. We've heard a lot about the provisions of the bill, but as chair of the Committee on Education and Labor, I have the responsibility of addressing the burden of high prescriptive drug costs on employer health care plans that spend billions of dollars every year to cover the cost of drugs. H.R. 3 boosts our economy by allowing employer-sponsored plans to benefit from the same cost savings negotiated for Medicare. In fact, last week, both the Congressional Budget Office and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services released their findings showing that the Lower Drug Costs Now Act will live up to its name for employees and employers. According to those analyses, the legislation will not only save $345 billion just on Part D, it will also save $46 billion in healthcare costs to private employers and $55 billion for workers over the next 10 years. I look forward to walking up the bill tomorrow with my colleagues on the Committee on Education and Labor, advancing it through regular order, and passing the Lower Drug Costs Now Act on the House floor. I want to thank the Speaker and my colleagues for their leadership in promoting the legislation, and now it is my honor to yield to a strong advocate for lower drug prices, a gentleman from Texas, Colin Allred.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, and to all of our chairs, Pallone, Neal, and Scott. I thank you for your hard work in putting this bill together and continuing to make it stronger. Also, it's good to be here with my fellow freshman, Congresswoman Katie Hill. We were both elected to get something done on this very issue. The high cost of health care and the high price of prescription drugs are the things I hear most about when I go home to North Texas. At a recent roundtable in Garland, Texas, I heard from Shane, who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was in college. Shane has a good job that pays her well, but with the high cost of insurance and the high cost of her insulin, she said she has to think twice about going to the doctor and how much insulin she uses. Fighting back tears, Shane told me she wants to stay healthy so she is not a burden on the healthcare system, but she struggles to do that as costs go up and up and up. She told me how she stands in line and wonders if she's going to be able to afford the insulin she needs to stay alive. That's sadly all too common, as 1 in 4 folks with diabetes ration their insulin because of the high cost. People are hurting. American seniors and families should not have to pay more for their medicines than what the drug companies charge people in other countries for the same drugs. It's just common sense. There's bipartisan agreement here. The president said he supported efforts to lower the cost of prescription drugs, and this bill does just that. Through powerful new tools, Medicare will negotiate directly to lower drug prices and stop the price gouging that is hurting the American people. This will lower drug prices for all Americans, including those with private insurance. North Texas gave me the opportunity of a lifetime to represent my home in Congress. I was raised by a single mother who was a public school teacher in Dallas. I was a YMCA kid. And it's because of my community in North Texas that I've been able to chase my version of the American dream. But sadly, the cost of prescription drugs is making it harder for too many of our fellow Americans to chase theirs. We cannot let the crippling cost of prescription drugs get in the way of someone living their version of the American dream. I'm ready to get to work to help pass this bill and to work with leaders in both parties to get it signed into law. Thank you to everyone who's been a part of this. And with that, I'm honored to turn over to my colleague from California, Congresswoman Katie Hill.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Allred, and I'd like to echo your thanks to our chairs and to our speaker. This is an incredible opportunity. When our historic freshman class was sent here to Washington, one of the issues that we immediately recognized we could all agree on, from California to South Carolina, from Iowa to New York, was that the cost of prescription drugs was crippling people in our communities. We were sent here with a mandate from the American people: fix it. There is absolutely no reason that drug companies that made over $30 billion in profits last year, while people in our communities pay as much as 67 times more for prescription drugs than other countries. There is no coincidence that our class is also the class that came here leading the charge to get money out of politics, because that's what has largely stopped this kind of reform from happening before. And make no mistake, Big Pharma is already spending money and will continue to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat this package. But we are up for the fight, and that's why we introduced the Lower Drug Costs Now Act, or H.R. 3, which is the most comprehensive legislation ever to tackle the sky-high cost of prescription drugs in this country. I'm particularly proud to support this bill and to have played a role in bringing it forward because of constituents like mine, like Donna, who I heard from at a town hall a few months ago. She's been forced to choose between the cost of her cancer medication and the treatment for her grandkids' autism. She was choosing her grandkids and the future potential for generations to come, even though she knew that that meant giving up her own life. And that was the moment that I knew that I couldn't stand by and say, well, maybe one day we will pass something kind of incremental. Because too many people know that I know that live in my community will die long before that happens. And we cannot accept that. So right now, we have to pass this. The time is urgent. It's life or death. And I'm proud to support it. And I will do whatever it takes to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Hill. Thank you very much, Congressman Allred. We're so honored to have two leaders of the freshman class be part of this initiative, and they have been part of lowering health care costs and lowering all kinds of things, protecting the Affordable Care Act from day one. Mr. Allred had the bill on the floor that very first day. I want to thank our special guests, Pam and Doug, for their moving stories, our chairman for their strategic thinking, and this is, again, a transformative day. This is not incremental. This is transformative. I also want to acknowledge that we were joined by Congressman Peter Welch, who is with us here, and also Mr. Pasquale was here, but I guess he has gone out with Mr. Neal to the Ways and Means Committee. With that, I thank all of you for joining us. We're moving expeditiously, 2 markups this week and 1 hearing next week. The next markup then, as the Chairman Neal said, would put it all together and go forward to take it to the floor, we hope, with the most bipartisan support possible. But none of the success would be possible without the stories that we've heard, the outside mobilization of so many of you who've worked so hard to give voice to the concerns of the American people. Again, for the people, we're going to lower the cost of prescription drugs. That's exactly what we're doing today. I'm going to excuse myself because as Speaker, I have to open the House at noon. Good afternoon.